The following program and contents, including the views and opinions expressed by the host and any guest speakers, are solely for informational and entertainment purposes. The views and opinions expressed are not endorsed or supported by REL-MAR McConnell Media Company, the X-Zone Broadcast Network, their employees, affiliates, or advertisers. The host and guest speakers are solely responsible for their own perspectives, and their views do not reflect those of REL-MAR McConnell Media Company, the X-Zone Broadcast Network, their employees, affiliates, or advertisers. The information provided in this program should not be considered as professional advice or as a substitute for professional consultation. Listeners and viewers are encouraged to form their own opinions and seek independent advice when necessary. REL-MAR McConnell Media Company, the X-Zone Broadcast Network, their employees, affiliates, and advertisers hereby disclaim any liability for any claims, damages, or losses incurred as a result of the information presented in this program.
Welcome to the Paranormal Stakeout radio TV show with Larry Lawson. As a former career law enforcement officer and law enforcement educator, Larry focuses on the use of tried and true law enforcement investigative techniques in conducting paranormal investigations. Despite his experience and training, Larry also keeps an open mind to discussions on topics that deal with evidence that are not quite as physical in nature. Paranormal Stakeout guests are professionals in the field of the paranormal and parapsychology, conducting the investigations and research needed to further the cause of paranormal study. Larry advocates an agenda of standardization of structure and training in the field of paranormal investigation and research for the purpose of one day being able to produce the evidence needed to convince a jury of the existence of the paranormal. Whether it is ghosts, UFOs, unsolved mysteries, hauntings or cryptids, no topic is beyond the investigative reach of Larry Lawson and the Paranormal Stakeout radio TV show team. Now, here is the host of the Paranormal Stakeout radio TV show, Larry Lawson.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Paranormal Stakeout. I'm your host, Larry Lawson, coming to you from our headquarters down in beautiful Vero Beach, Florida. So happy to have you all back with us tonight. As most of you know, my group, the Florida Bureau of Paranormal Investigation and Indian River Hauntings, is pretty active down here in Florida. Should you be interested in checking us out, you can go to my websites at paranormalfbi.com or indianriverhauntings.com. You can also check out what we're doing on YouTube at Indian River Hauntings 2341. Now, would love to hear from all of you. If you have questions, thoughts, or comments that we can bring up at the beginning of each show, please email them to me at ghostguy@paranormalstakeout.org. That's ghostguy@paranormalstakeout.org, and we'll get your questions and thoughts right here on the show. Interesting guest tonight. As you know, we've been doing a lot of shows on UFOs and cryptids. Tonight's going to be a little bit different, but I think you're going to enjoy it. Tonight, my guest is James Szubski. James is the Chief Operating Officer of Margie's Outdoor Store, located in the Columbia River Gorge, in Washington State. His store also is involved in taking reports on paranormal events that occur up there. James is a former volunteer search and rescue EMT, wildlife firefighter, mountain guide, and most importantly, a highly decorated member of the United States Army infantry. So with that, I'd like to welcome to the show Mr. James Szubski. James, welcome to Paranormal Stakeout, my friend.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's an interesting background. First of all, thank you for your service in serving our country. It's a great honor to have somebody with those credentials on our show.
It was my pleasure.
Interesting stuff. Wildlife. I'm sorry, I get it out. I'll get this out. Wildland firefighter. I'll get it out.
Yes.
So were you smoke jumper? Is that what you did?
I was out in Yellowstone back in 1988 during the really big fires, and
Oh, okay.
we were out there. And it's one of those kind of things where the whole monument was burning down, and my crew was set out there, and we saved a number of structures, a couple of towns. Really phenomenal experience.
And this is public service is all about taking care of others. Well,
Mhm.
tell us a little bit more about you. I note that you are I don't know if expert's the right word, but certainly knowledgeable on this creature up in your neck of the woods called the Ape-Cat. Like to hear more about you, your background, and how you got involved in this type of work.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. Yeah, so we have my wife and I have a store up in Washington State. We're in the Columbia River Gorge, which is forms the border between Washington and Oregon, and
Mhm,
we're about 60 miles east of Portland. So if people are trying to get a picture of that.
mhm.
So we our stores are right in the middle of the Cascade Mountains, and so there's some peaks people may be familiar with. There's Mount Adams, Mount Hood, Mount St. Helens, which famously erupted back
Oh
in
yeah.
1980. And so those are all stratovolcanoes that are within 30 miles, 35 miles of the store. And the Columbia River Gorge is the second largest river in America. It is the only sea level passage through the Cascade Mountains. On the west side of the mountains, it is a rainforest that sees over 100 inches of rain a year. On the east side of the mountains, in the rain shadow, it is a desert, and there's less than 10 inches of rain a year. So it's an area where it is in the 1980s, it was designated as the country's first national scenic area, and it is a place of jaw-dropping beauty. We have um, over 100 waterfalls here. Many of them are hundreds of feet, some are 600 feet tall. There are
Mhm.
caves and forests, desert mesas. It's truly one of the most unique and beautiful places in the world. And we were living up in Seattle about 2.5 years ago, and my wife's mother died. And Margie had a couple of stores down here in Bingen, Washington. And we made the decision to move down here and manage the businesses. And for me, it was kind of like winning the lottery. You can tell from my background that I'm a lifelong adventurer. And the gorge it it couldn't be more of a paradise for a person who loves the outdoors. And I was like I said, a mountain guide and a spelunker, rock climbing. We have windsurfing down here, whitewater rafting.
Mm.
So it's was just couldn't be better. One of the stores that Margie had started really wasn't as successful as it could have been. And with my background, we turned it into an outdoor store. And shortly thereafter, spontaneously, unprompted, people started coming in and telling us their stories, really strange experiences they were having in the wilderness areas near the store.
Mhm.
We were getting a lot of stories about Sasquatch, a lot of stories about UFOs and lights in the skies, and stories about even stranger things than that. So, personally, very interesting to me. I've had a few unusual experiences in my past, and like you, a very open mind. And so I decided to lean into it. We put up a big sign in the window that said, "File your paranormal reports here." And we developed a report form, and sure enough, people started coming in and letting us know in a more formal way some of the things that they were experiencing. Um, I had a really strict rule with my employees, and that was whenever someone comes in and tells us a story, no matter how outlandish it sounds to you, we will treat that person with respect. We'll ask
Okay.
intelligent follow up questions. We won't insert our beliefs about what they may or may not have seen onto their story. We'll take in the data. And at the beginning, I really didn't know what we were going to do with it, but it was so interesting and fascinating. It seemed like something really worth doing.
Well,
And
let me ask you a quick question here.
sure.
Are most of the people that make the reports, are they folks that are enjoying the landscape, either hiking, boating, or whatever, from
Mhm.
outside the area, or most of them local?
Most of the folks initially were local. And one of the things that kind of amazed me was that it is really, really common for someone who lives in the gorge to have seen Sasquatch or to have seen a UFO or to have a neighbor or a friend who has. It's almost like the same rarity that someone might see a bear up near the Seattle area. It's
Mhm.
interesting and exciting. And so that to me was astonishing, um, like sort of a sociological cultural phenomenon. In fact,
Hmm.
so there are two counties that are on the Washington side. Our stores are in Klickitat County, and then my home, and that's on the east, sort of the deserty side of the gorge. And
Hmm.
my home is in Skamania County. And Skamania County, back in the 1960s, actually passed laws that said it is illegal to hunt Bigfoot, and you will go to jail and pay thousands
Really?
of dollars in fines. Yeah, so it was the first county in the nation to enact such a law, and a few others have since then. And it wasn't just a one-off because they updated those laws several times in the subsequent years.
Well, let me ask you this. Was the law to keep from people from going out there and just shooting each other accidentally, or were there viable sightings that caused the county leaders to come up with that law?
So the answer is both.
Okay.
We have over, or I should say, close to 900 documented Bigfoot sightings in Washington State. And
Hmm.
Skamania County, like back in the 60s and 70s, it was a true hotbed, which is when these laws were enacted. Of course, that was the time of shows like In Search of and, with
Hmm.
Leonard Nimoy and that thing. And so there were many folks coming up here with rifles, and there was a significant fear that people would get shot. But also, there's a sense that this is a many folks who've seen it believe it to be a biological creature. You have to understand so the Cascade Mountains are about 80,000 square miles, which is roughly equal to the 10 smallest states in the country combined in terms of land mass. So it is an
Hmm.
enormous area. And like even up in Seattle, we have about 4,000 people per square mile. When you look at those 10 states, it's roughly about that, about 4,000 people per square mile. Here in the Columbia River Gorge, we have about 10 people per square mile. And they're really all based in the thin ribbon of humanity that is the river. The river is significant. Like I said, it's the largest river. It's barges go up and down it, so it's navigable. There are a
Hmm.
couple of navigation locks on it. There's railroads on either side of the river, and then highways on the other side. But once you get beyond that thin ribbon of humanity, it is a deep, deep wilderness, and some of the most rugged wilderness you're going to find anywhere in the world.
Mm.
And so, um, you know, I think I'm remembering your question, but the idea that it's a very remote place, and the sightings, the people who live here know what wildlife looks like. It's not like someone who lives in the city and mistakes a dog for a bear or something like that. Like the people
Right.
here are very familiar with the wildlife, and so they believe many of the folks that we talk to that the Bigfoot is a biological creature,
Mm.
and that's sort of borne out by the Native American traditions.
That was my next question. What type of Native American influence do you have in the area? And certainly my original question was keeping people from hurting themselves. And my first thought are people coming from outside the area, just trying to hunt Bigfoot rather than the folks that live there. So that's where I
Yeah.
was kind of going with that. So tell me about the Native American influence and how that affects all of this.
So, like Alaska, Washington has one of the highest percentages of Native American in our population. So it's about 15% of the folks in Washington State are Native American. There are a number of traditional nations, First Persons nations, that call the gorge their home. And when we look at the stories that they tell, it's very clear that they perceive this to be another creature in their landscape. Um, and what's interesting, when you look at the West Coast stories of Bigfoot and Sasquatch, they are often describing a biological creature. Like this is the man who eats fish and berries by the creek, right? Like,
Mhm.
but when you get the further east you go, the more metaphorical these stories seem to become. It's the creature that is half blue and half red, and things like that that seem to be speaking more to some type of allegory. But here, many of the descriptions are clearly talking about some type of animal. And so when I talk, we've had folks come in, bring us hair samples,
Mhm.
have detailed descriptions. There's one gentleman who lives in the area who believes that there's sort of a pinch point for their travel through his property, and he's seen them dozens and dozens of times. He's seen pregnant ones. He's seen, juveniles.
Interesting.
He's seen full adults.
Mhm.
And when I asked him, he was confident that it was a biological creature, but then he said, and they seem to have a limited teleportation ability, which is,
Let's talk about it because I've got to go to our first break. This
sure.
first part's already gone quickly, but I want to continue this conversation on evidence and possibly where these creatures are coming from. So, folks, stay with us. We'll be back right after these messages with my guest tonight, Steve Szubski. We'll be right back after these messages. And we are back with my guest tonight, James Szubski. Sorry. Oh my goodness, that's embarrassing.
Don't feel bad. It's been mangled all my life. The worst I ever heard was Suzulaboos. So I think you're ahead of the game.
Yeah. Okay. I don't feel so bad now. But very interesting conversation we were having just before the last break. You were kind of heading down the road of Native Americans and possibly this creature that we all know as Sasquatch, Bigfoot, maybe a dimensional type of creature passing through a portal type of thing. Can you elaborate on that further? What the legends say in your neck of the woods?
Well, so in terms of this idea of limited teleportation, many folks say that they seem to be able to travel great distance in the blink of an eye. And so, like by great distance, I mean 50 or 100 yards. And so to me, that's a very interesting thing. And these are from people who are certain that they are seeing a biological creature. And so we've got those reports. And I am reluctant to talk too much about the Native American legends because it's really not my culture, right? And so I don't want to misrepresent what we hear there. But there's definitely a very strong tradition that this is a creature that they interacted with. We've heard stories that there are treaties between some of the Native American folks, and the what they call Skookum or Sasquatch, Bigfoot people, for berry picking fields and mushroom picking areas and things like that. And so, and even as we look back throughout the history, we really started seeing Lewis and Clark in the area in like 1806, and then the Oregon Trail sort of ended here at the Columbia River. And in that time, it is filled with stories of folks encountering strange creatures. And so, just to give you a sort of a sense, we have obviously reports of Sasquatch. We have reports of little people. So these are anywhere between 9 to 36 inches tall humanoids. We have reports of UFOs, and so there's advanced military aircraft, which is like black helicopters that make no sound flying through the canyons. We have reports of what are traditional UFOs, and even photographs of some of these. These are things that are either the traditional saucer shape, the tic-tac shape that you see in some of those fighter pilot cams, and then triangular shaped vehicles. And we also have reports of glowing orbs and different types of light. In fact, my wife and I have seen this ourselves driving down Highway 14 on the Washington side. And it seems like there are really two types of those orbs. Some of them seem to be aerial phenomenon, and then others seem to be more ground-based. And people see them in the woods and near some of the larger rock formations in the area. And then, as you mentioned, there's this Klickitat Ape-Cat, which really was new to me and very interesting to hear about.
Well, I want to talk about the Ape-Cat in detail. That's got me very fascinated. But going back to the Bigfoot, and you mentioned earlier that folks had brought into you hair samples and things like that. What is the most significant piece of evidence that has been brought to you that you've seen that indicates the presence of this type of creature?
Well, like I said, the hair samples were fascinating. Of course, without doing any kind of DNA, it's hard to say, what it is. But to me, what is most interesting is the consistency and the sheer volume of reports that we get. And we hear from, law enforcement officials and everyday folks, insurance salesmen will come in their suits and tell us their Sasquatch experience stories. And so there are just so many of them. And, of course, there's been some very famous castings that have been done in the area. There's the Skookum Field cast, which captured the creature laying on its side. They had the handprint, the hair on the side of its body, and in the handprint there was, the swirls from the fingerprint, type of
Hmm.
patterns on that, and so it was almost a full body cast, and so the whole area for so long and so many people have seen it. To me, that's the most compelling piece of evidence is just how many folks have seen it. I'm an old adventurer
Hmm.
with bad knees. I am not a researcher, you know, in the traditional sense. Part of the reason why I'm going on interviews and shows like yours is because I am inviting folks who are more experienced, skilled, to come out and do investigations. There is so much going on here. We have had over 160 reports in the store in just a year and a half since we've been doing this. It is absolutely crawling with phenomena. We have a number of theories about why that may be, but this is one of the true hotspots. And it's been going on for decades and decades and decades. This isn't like a new thing out here in the Columbia River Gorge. It is, uh, like I kind of liken it to, you're walking through the woods and you see a log or a rock and you turn it over and there is just this whole ecosystem of things crawling around under there. And that's kind of what it feels like. You know, every week, 2 or 3 times a week, new Scooby-Doo mystery walks through our door and there's a new interesting phenomenon to check out.
And that's what really has me fascinated about your area. I'm an old cop. Evidence is kind of what I grew up on. That's
Hmm.
preparing a case, take it to court, and that's why I ask a lot of questions about evidence. Um, Keeping an open mind is important. And hey, I'm a ghost guy, so I understand that we've got to keep our minds open. Uh, One of the questions I've always had about any cryptid, but we're talking about Bigfoot right now, is why haven't we found more definitive evidence? And the prevailing feeling these days is that they're a dimensional creature, that they pop in and out. I'm not sure where I am on that, but it would make sense. I know they've had some samples taken in different parts of the country on hair, and sometimes they say it's untraceable. Sometimes they equate it to a different type of animal. But I would really like to see somehow somebody get evidence that definitively maps this animal. Certainly in your area, I mean, it's no surprise, other than maybe West Virginia, Southern Ohio. I don't think anybody has more Bigfoot sightings than your neck of the woods up there.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and in all your work out there, you're traveling, you're backpacking out there, you have not come across one yourself, though.
I have seen things. I may have seen one of these ape cats, but it was before we had many reports on it, so I didn't know what I was looking at. And the creature was swimming, and it was several hundred yards away, so I couldn't make a positive ID on it. But certainly, there. I am convinced that this landscape has experienced significant traumas. We had 15 million years ago, and go way back, a gigantic fissure, 112 miles long, opened up near the Idaho-Washington border, and trillions of tons of lava spewed out of this in over 300 eruptive events. And they flowed 300 miles across Washington state through the ancient Columbia River Valley all the way to the ocean. There were over 300 eruptions, and they form a layer cake of basalt rock lava
Mhm.
columns, and because of the timing of when they cooled, the Earth's magnetic field was in a different orientation each time. And so you've got this layer cake, and every single layer has a different magnetic orientation. There, of course, is the river, which has got 14 dams on it and accounts for 44% of the hydroelectric power in the United States. It's enough energy generated here by the Columbia River to power a city this size of Seattle and then seven more just like it. And
Mhm.
then 12,000 years ago, we had the Younger Dryas, or the Missoula flood. So these were floods larger than any flood in the history of the Earth that we know of. They estimate that it was equal to the volume of all rivers on Earth combined times 10. And that flowed across eastern Washington at the end of the Ice Age and got backed up at the gorge and then rocketed down the gorge and literally just peeled everything off of the walls, and so the gorge became like you imagine floods that are literally 1,000 feet deep, traveling at 70 miles an
Mhm.
hour, entrained with boulders and icebergs and trees and everything that was in its path, and it swept through the gorge and completely exposed all of those differently oriented magnetic layers. When you look at the government issued navigational maps, the ones by NOAA, there are bright pink letters on them that warn pilots and naval navigators that your compass readings will be wrong in this area. So it's an extremely complex electromagnetic environment. And then you
Mhm.
add on to that, we've got these volcanoes that came up 2 to 5 million years ago, and they introduced this strong vertical energy. And so the whole place is just filled with this very unique electromagnetic environment. And I have theories that may be why we have so many paranormal reports in the area.
Well, and I'm a big believer in the land has a lot to do with what happens, whether it's because of the trauma perpetrated on it by humans or nature. I do believe I would agree with you that the land does have a tremendous effect on everything that we do and then everything that we experience. Um, you did talk. I noticed on some of your stuff that you have. You mentioned that there was some sort of government work that was done up there that released animals. They were working with apex predatory animals,
Yeah,
and they've escaped them. Now, could this also be the result of what the land has done to them? Tell me a little bit more about that.
yeah. Well, that is a story that's deeply connected to the Klickitat Ape-Cat. Um, and so, just briefly, the Klickitat Ape-Cat is an enormous black panther-like creature.
Mhm.
We've had over 70 reports of this creature alone, and the reports go back 30 years. Everyone describes a very muscular cat with with black fur and a long black tail. Now, of course, we have cougars out here that are naturally occurring, but the wildlife experts say there's no such thing as a black cougar, and the only large black cat in North America is a jaguar, but its range is 1,000 miles south of here. And so all those things are pretty unusual to have so many reports of this creature. And of of those reports, there are a handful of them. In fact, the very first report I ever received about it. So the creature has a face that looks like a monkey. And again, we specifically do not judge or try to insert what we think happened or what someone has experienced. And other folks have described it as a face that's flattened. So you think about like a difference between a German Shepherd and a pug, same species of
Okay.
animal. One's got a much
Mm.
flattened face. Some of the reports say that it's got intelligent ape-like eyes. But the big concern is what is this enormous creature? Some people say, about half of the reports say that it is so large that it's 4 to 5 feet tall at the shoulder, and that's
Mm.
bigger than a tiger. And so to me, that's putting it clearly straight in the realm of an impossible creature.
Yeah.
We don't have a
Well,
living analog for it.
we got to go to our next break, believe it or not, already. Uh, I want to hear more about the ape cat, more about the description, more about what people have experienced with it right after these messages. So, folks, stay with us. We'll be back right after this. And we are back with my guest, James Szubski.
You got
Got
it.
it. There we go. James, fascinating story. Now, I've got to tell you, until I started researching you for the show, I'd never heard of the ape cat before, and you've just given an interesting description. I'd like you to kind of pick up where you left off, continue
Sure thing.
talking about what this creature is and what you've heard about it and what you think it is.
Yeah, so like I said, I've got one report. This was from someone who was basically a friend of the family when Margie was alive, knew her well, and she had helped his family out. Came in, took him about 45 minutes to work up the courage to tell me what he had seen. And I should say that we have pictures on our website. If you go to margiesoutdoorstore.com and go to the paranormal section of our website, there's pictures of many of the things that I'm talking about, or at least artist representations of it. And that's margiesoutdoorstore.com. And so he described the creature very much. He was orienteering So map and compass work about 3 miles from the store, area called Buck Creek off the White Salmon River. And he said his compass started acting strange. He looked up. He saw this enormous black cat looking at him from across the river. Cougars are terrified of humans. The sound of human voice will chase a cougar away from something it's just killed. And the fact that it stood there and looked at him, very curious. Black fur, again, shouldn't be out here. Enormous size, so 4 to 5 feet tall to shoulder. There's nothing living that's that big as a cat. There's one creature called the Panthera atrox. It's an Ice Age creature, supposedly went extinct 10,000 years ago, also known as the American lion, that lived in Washington State during the Ice Age. That's the only creature in the fossil record that is anywhere near that size. This creature was over 1,000 pounds, and it had the largest brain capacity, or brain cavity of any cat that has ever existed. It's the only thing that matches it from a biological perspective, but they're supposed to be extinct. And he said that, he observed this creature for several minutes. It had a face that looked like a monkey. He was adamant about that description, intelligent ape-like eyes, and a few other descriptive features that were like a primate. We like to keep those quiet so we can evaluate other people's reports. Fascinating story. The next day I told my employees about it. One of my employees started shaking because she had seen this creature herself while she was driving one morning down Klickitat Canyon. And so she also described an enormous black cat-like creature. No one believed her, not even her family. When she described it, they told her that she had probably seen a cow. And so on its face, that's just how insulting. Like, this is a grown woman. And to suggest that she couldn't tell the difference between a cow and a panther is ridiculous. But it's very common, as I'm sure you know, that witnesses, or when people hear stories of something unusual, they want to normalize it. They want their world to be the world that they know. And we even do this ourselves. Many folks who have extraordinary experiences rationalize it, even within their own minds, and convince themselves that they saw something mundane, when in fact they may have seen something truly astonishing or highly unusual. So with these two reports, one right after the other, one literally the next day, I said, well, this is something that I'm utterly fascinated by. So the store has a radio advertising budget. We put up ads on the radio that said, "Has anyone else seen this creature? Please come in and file a report." I put out, flyers at the local trailheads. And sure enough, we've had, like I said, close to 70 reports now.
In what period of time? What period of time?
In less than a year and a half. Reports go back 30 or 40 years. Senior law enforcement officials. And the thing that really, I'm trying to make sense of it, right? And so we'll hear these stories about a big black cat. And I'll think, it's probably just a mutated cougar. And then someone will come back in with this story that it has a face that looks like a monkey. And the one that was really believable to me was a fire chief from another wildland firefighting group was fighting in the forest between Mount Adams and Mount St. Helens. They encountered it on their first day out on a 3-day mission, and they didn't know what they were going to do if it showed up at their camp. Now, thankfully, none of the reports that we received involve hostile encounters. They all seem to be fairly positive. In fact, some folks say that they feel like they've had a magical experience. One individual said that he actually filmed it. Now, don't get excited, because it is a crappy film. And basically, all you can see is his eyes and hear some vocalizations. But what's interesting is that as he was filming, he said, "Oh my God, I better capture this." He was sort of working in an outbuilding in a rural area. He pulled out his phone to film it, and within 7 seconds, his battery in his phone and the battery in his headlamp died simultaneously. And so there's an electromagnetic effect there. Interestingly, when you look at the Native American culture here, we have petroglyphs in Klickitat County. Some are just 20 minutes from the store. There's an area where there's dozens and dozens of them. And one of them definitely looks like a cat with wavy lines under its head. So, and I take that to be water. What's interesting is there's a legend amongst the Native Americans of the Great Lakes area about a creature they call the Mashepashu. This is, they say it's an underwater panther. So in those traditions, when something's from the underwater realm or the sky realm or from within the earth, it's a creature that has a foot both in the spirit world and in the physical world. And the Mashepashu are known as panther protectors. So their role in this supernatural realm is to protect.
Hmm.
And a description that I found of the Mishepeshu is that it looks like a black panther with the face of a man. And so I thought, that seems like it may be an interesting clue. And again, I don't know what we're dealing with here. It may be just some type of mutated creature.
Hmm.
But as we mentioned earlier, there's an interesting story that it may have come from the Hanford nuclear site, which is just upriver from us.
Well, and I want to ask about that in a second, but didn't you tell me that what you thought might have been the Ape-Cat you actually saw in the water yourself?
Yeah, I was in the desert side of the mountains at an area
Hmm.
called Horsethief Butte. Horsethief Butte looks like a typical desert mesa from the road, but when you get up into it, it is riddled with a labyrinth of hidden canyons and amphitheaters. There are petroglyphs on the walls, and it is a place of profound spiritual power. It's clear that Native Americans had vision quests there, and when you're there, you definitely feel the flowing energy of the Columbia River. It's a profoundly powerful place. And it was carved out by those giant ice age floods that rocketed through here 12,000 to 15,000 years ago. And below the butte is a horse thief lake. Lewis and Clark stopped here. It was one of their places where they traded with the Indians.
Hmm.
And I was looking down this slot canyon and I could see into the lake. There was an enormous creature swimming in the lake. I could gauge its size because there were also some waterfowl out there. It was clearly bigger than a man, but smaller than a car, dark in color, and it was sort of patrolling the center of the lake. So this is not the kind of behavior you see. Elk swim, bear swim, but they're typically point-to-point swimmers. They're not going to swim, 1,000 feet out into the middle of the lake and just
And
patrol around.
search. Yeah.
Yeah. And then it would submerge for up to 5 minutes and resurface. I was too far away, and unfortunately, I didn't have binoculars. And at the time, we hadn't had any stories about the Ape-Cat. But I scratched my head for months and months trying to figure out what in the heck did I see. There was no creature that I could imagine that is that large that would be swimming and submerging for that period of time. And so, you know, again, we've had in some of these reports, when I say 70 reports, it's gotten to the point where people stop me in the grocery store or on the street, and they'll tell me, an encounter that they had. And some of the stories are not sensational. I was driving my ATV and this giant black cat jumped across the trail and scared the crap out of me, and I never saw it again. We've had many reports of people seeing it while they're driving at night, and oftentimes it is seen to be leaping across the road. And when its body is extended, it measures the full length of a two-lane highway. So it is apparently a massive, massive creature.
I'm shocked I've never heard of this before. So that's, I guess, just so many creatures out there that we're just now getting information on. It's just fascinating.
And like I said, the stories go back decades. And in the local area, people were aware. Like when I put out, those radio ads asking if anyone had seen it, it was very quick. We had 20, 30 reports within a couple of weeks.
Mhm.
And so people have been seeing it here for a long, long time. And many folks don't know that there's no such thing as black cougars, so they never reported it. And of course,
Mhm.
it never had the name Klickitat Ape Cat until, that I wanted to give it some name that, gave it, a face to the name kind of a thing. And
Okay. Okay.
and so, people have talked about, black panthers being in America for some time, but it's never been confirmed by biologists.
Well, and there's places all over the country where people have seen similar animals, and everybody hasn't heard about all of them. So when I say I'm surprised I haven't heard about it, I get it. But you mentioned before about that government facility,
Yeah.
and is there because in looking through some of your stuff, the Ape Cat really has only started being seen about 40 years ago.
Yeah.
So,
So to understand what we're talking about, during the World War II, obviously we started the Manhattan Project, which is where the
mhm,
nuclear bomb came from, and everyone knows about Los Alamos, New Mexico, where they designed the bomb. But it was in Hanford, Washington, which is about 100 miles northeast of here as the crow flies, just upriver from us. They built the Hanford nuclear site, and this is the place where they actually created the plutonium. So this was an element that never doesn't exist in nature. and they were literally toying with the fabric of reality and creating plutonium on an industrial scale for the war effort. Once the plutonium from Hanford was the fuel that was for the first Trinity test, the first nuclear explosion
Hmm.
ever, and then the Nagasaki bomb. And then during the Cold War, they produced enough plutonium at Hanford to power 60,000 nuclear weapons. They call it the Apocalypse Factory. And from the very beginning, they had an animal testing program at Hanford. So where Los Alamos was sort of like where the engineers were, like Hanford was where the working man was. They eventually had 9 nuclear reactors out there. It was one of our most top secret sites. The organization that would eventually become the Department of Energy is what runs it. And they, from the very beginning, had this animal testing program. They knew that the Nazis were interested in nuclear weapons for making bombs, but the Nazis were also very interested in genetic experimentation. Back in the 40s, we didn't know what we know now about how radiation can cause mutations and all that that meant. And so the guy that they chose to run this program was from the University of Washington, Dr. Loren Donaldson. His claim to fame, his only major academic achievement, is he had created a super animal, Donaldson super trout. This is a fish that is 8 times stronger and larger than a normal trout, can swim in fresh water and salt water. It reaches reproductive maturity in half the time as a normal fish, and has an array of amazing abilities. And so he's the guy that they choose to run this program. And, and so during World War II, he's at the forefront of nuclear research on animals. Eventually, he winds up in the South Pacific at Bikini Atoll and the disastrous Castle Bravo tests and all that kind of stuff. He's eventually replaced by Bill Bear, who is where we get these stories about experiments on apex predators.
And on that note, I hate to interrupt you again, but we've got to go to our last break. Folks, fascinating stuff. We're getting into a whole new chapter here, so stay with us. We'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back to this, our last session for tonight. Been a fascinating discussion, but I want to remind everybody once again, if you want to check out what we're doing, you can see our websites at paranormalfbi.com and indianriverhauntings.com, and check us out on YouTube at Indian River Hauntings 2341. Get those questions to me at ghostguideparanormalstakeout.org. Also, I want to encourage all of you to take a look at the great programming on the X Zone Broadcast Network. Go to xzbn.net for all the great shows on this channel. And James, how can folks find you?
The best way to find me is to go to margiesoutdoorstore.com. If you want to get a hold of me, you can staff at margiesoutdoorstore.com to send an email, and that's the best way to contact me that way. We're also on YouTube and Facebook and Instagram. Just Margie's Outdoor Store. There's not many of us out there like that. So.
And it's sounds like a beautiful area out there, regardless of the paranormal activity.
Yeah.
So let's get back to this absolutely fascinating story. I mean, most people, like you said, know about Los Alamos. They know that that's where the bomb was created. I don't think a lot of folks realize the influence or the effect what Washington State had on this entire program. So this was located, this plant was, or this facility was located about 100 miles from you.
Yep.
They were doing testing, and they were using animals for genetic testing. Is that what I'm gathering?
So they were, you have to understand, so the Hanford nuclear site is 600 square miles. It is a massive spot in the desert. It's right along the Columbia River. And so it's just north of the gorge, just before the river bends and turns into the gorge is where they located this place. And they literally use the energy from the river to usher in what they call the atomic frontier, right? Like they literally took the power of the river and used that to make the plutonium. They're and some of the most advanced, like the the National Pacific Northwest Laboratories are out there. There's a place called the LIGO out there right now. This is the thing that's got these 2-mile-long vacuum tubes, and LIGO stands for the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory. And they are literally, if you go to their website, they are looking for anomalies in the space-time continuum there. And a week after they turned it on, they found them. I mean, like, so the stuff that's going on at Hanford is unbelievable. And it for decades was our government's top nuclear site. The most intense and uh, bizarre experiments were going on there. It is now North America's biggest cleanup site. It's the biggest Superfund site in North America because of all of the things that they did there. And so they had this animal testing program. They could house 1,000 large animals there at a time. I've seen propaganda films from the 60s. They call it the atomic zoo. And so much of what we know about how radiation affects human beings and animals and livestock and everything else was based on research done at Hanford. And
Hmm.
there's a guy named Bill Bear. He took over from Dr. Donaldson through basically the Cold War. He was in charge of the biology program out there. Unfortunately, he passed away about 7 years ago. But I've watched several oral histories produced by Bill. Amazing individual. He was a World War II veteran specializing in amphibious warfare. And he came in to run this program. And in these interviews, he talks about this event where they had the reports vary between 30 and 50 alligators, so apex predators. He holds up a picture of the device they were using to irradiate these creatures. He tells the story, and this is verified by newspaper accounts at the time, that one night 6 of these irradiated apex predators outsmarted the scientists and escaped their pens and got into the Columbia River. And they had secret teams of Army hunters out there for 6 months from July to January hunting for these things, and they only ever caught 4 of them. So there are still apparently 2 irradiated apex alligators, apex predators out there swimming in the
Well,
Columbia River.
that's interesting because an alligator is my neck of the woods, and it's
Yeah.
awfully cold up there for alligators.
Well, it
So
turns out that
why? Go
why
ahead. I'm
were they
sorry.
doing that? Well, that's a great question. Why would they be doing this?
Yeah.
Well, right now, a quarter of the U.S. nuclear stockpile is guarded by dolphins. And the reason is that many of our most sensitive nuclear sites are in waterways. And when you're trying to look for like Soviet scuba divers, sonar doesn't cut it. Like you can't tell the difference on sonar whether you're looking at a tuna, a sea lion, or a Soviet scuba diver, right? Especially if they're coming in at night. And so they learned that dolphins are highly trainable. And since 1958, they've had this program. It
Yeah.
only became public in the 1980s, where the dolphins would actually be patrolling these areas. And when they identified a diver, what I understand happened is they had this special apparatus attached to their snout, sort of like a harpoon, like a barbed spear. And they would drive that into the diver. And then a balloon would inflate and it would bring the diver to the surface. And then the Navy would come and scoop them up and interrogate them. And so we know that since the 1950s, the United States government has been using animals to guard its most top secret nuclear sites. The problem with Hanford is it's got 90 miles of river coastline, and that's freshwater, and you can't bring dolphins in to guard that perimeter. Did you have a question?
Well, I've got to ask you this. I find this fascinating about the dolphins, and most people are aware that the military has used dolphins for many different things. Any reports that they've actually caught Soviet or foreign nationals trying to dive on the area? I mean,
Well,
did that?
so I can tell you that Hanford had 4 Nike missile batteries there because
Mhm.
a Nike missile is a surface to air nuclear tipped warhead, right? And so the idea was they would rather detonate a nuclear weapon over US soil and United States populations to take out Soviet bombers than lose Hanford. Like that's how important it was. And so the security around this place was unbelievable. And if you're a cold warrior and you know you've got 90 miles of river coastline you need to guard, a near impossible task, and you see that you've got your cohorts are using dolphins, you're going to ask yourself one question. What is the best riverine hunter in the world? What animal can we bring in that's going to
Right.
be manage this task? Well, it turns out the black panther is the #1 riverine predator in the world. These creatures can hold their breath for up to 15 minutes. They can eat underwater. They can swim a kilometer in the open ocean. They are stronger pound for pound than any other big cat in the world. They've got night vision that's 6 times better than a human being. And they always, always, always instinctively drag their prey to shore. So this is a combination of traits which is absolutely ideally suited for a sentinel creature. And one of the theories is that these cats were part of that atomic zoo they had going on at Hanford. And just like the alligators, they perhaps were training them to be sentinel creatures to guard the river coastline. Like the alligators, they outsmarted the scientists and escaped. And also, like the alligators, they were unable to capture these things once they were escaped. Now, if you look at the map behind me, you can see that if you go north, east, or south, you're going to head deeper into the desert. If you head to the west, you're going to head into the mountains where there's a far greater abundance of available food sources and habitat, cover, and everything else. We have had reports of Ape-Cat or big black cats. There's a guy who said he saw one in his driveway and it had a young kitten with it. And so we think that there may have been some connection with the programs going on at Hanford. Interestingly, there are scientists at Hanford now who track nuclear bunny poop. What happens out there is that the rabbits who live on the range hang out next to the barrels of nuclear waste because they're warm. They get
Hmm.
irradiated and then they poop all over the place. But what you have to understand is these are irradiated animals that then become food for the indigenous coyotes and mountain lions and everything else. So whether it is an intentional program or some type of mutation that has been occurring because of the proximity to that site, which is notoriously lax in its management of the nuclear waste byproducts and also the chemical waste byproducts of what they were doing out there. We don't know, but that's to me like if you're looking for a non-magical, non-supernatural explanation as to why we've got enormous black cats in Washington State, that seems pretty plausible to
So you possible that these animals just became infected with the nuclear waste coming from the site, or it could be an intentional security program. Could be one of the two.
me. Yeah, either one of those seem like viable options. We know from Chernobyl that high doses of radiation cause horrific mutations, and they
Mhm.
don't actually they're not viable creatures, right? But low doses. In fact, there was this really interesting debate that I found from June of 1970, and Dr. Lauren Donaldson went on record as saying, "Yeah, high levels of radiation is harmful to animals, but low doses actually make them stronger." And then he never said anything about it again. And I think he was told to shut up. But it's interesting, like just like when you get inoculated, with like a virus vaccine, they're introducing a low grade adjutant into your system, and
Mhm.
then your system responds and grows stronger. And the creatures that Donaldson had produced when he was doing his fish studies, they were stronger, faster, better at reproducing. They were more effective in every single way. And so, you know, and even in Chernobyl, the exclusion zone right now, that has thriving populations of wolves and other wildlife.
Yeah, it
If you
does.
if you're not completely like if you're not zapped, into oblivion, and you have this low grade radiation in your environment, it's making these creatures stronger and more viable rather than less viable. Again,
Well,
I don't know if that's what's going on here, but geez, like I'm grasping at straws to try to figure out what in the heck is
well,
going on.
you've got one of the most beautiful parts of the country up there, no question. In your description of it is eloquent. You combine that with all of the land changes over the centuries and millennium. You combine that with this facility there, all the magnetic anomalies that go on there. You've just got a salad of
Yeah,
paranormal
it's a
activity
thick
there. I don't know
paranormal
how
soup out here. Yeah, and
it. Go ahead.
well, I was going to say there's a place just 20 minutes north of the store called ESETI Ranch. It stands for Enlightened Contact with Extraterrestrial Intelligence. And Jim's been running his ranch up there for decades. People come from all over the world, and you can camp out in his yard. Basically, he's got a big ranch up there,
Mhm.
and you watch UFOs fly around Mount Adams all night. People
Yeah,
come, skeptics will leave.
we
Yeah,
haven't even touched the UFO part of this. But um, unfortunately, my friend, we're getting towards the end of our time together. But once again, the email people can find you at.
at staff at margiesoutdoorstore.com. and the website is margiesoutdoorstore.com. And if you look on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram for Margie's Outdoor Store, you'll find us.
Check it out, folks. Beautiful country, great guest. Thank you for being with us tonight, James. Hope to see you again soon. I'd love to talk to you more about some of this stuff.
I would too.
It's fascinating. All right.
It is.
We'll be in touch. But folks, thank you so much for being with us tonight. Great show. We'll see you next time. But until then, take care of yourselves, love your family, and we'll see you on the other side. Good night, all.